Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Becoming Women podcast with me, your host, Ella Sims, where each week I speak with inspiring women about their teenage years. If this is your first time listening, a very warm welcome to you, and if you're a regular listener, then thank you. My mission with this podcast is to support teenage girls as they navigate the ups and downs of growing up. In each episode, I talk with grown women about their individual journeys as a teenager, the highs and lows, any challenges they may have faced, and what advice they would share with their younger self to help reassure you that you are not alone and those tricky teenage years will pass. This week's episode, I'm with Hope Virgo. Hope is the author of Stand Tall Little Girl and an award-winning international leading advocate for people with eating disorders. Hope helps young people and employers, including schools, hospitals and businesses, to deal with the rising tide of mental health issues which affect 1 in 4 people and cost employers between 33 and 42 billion annually. Hope is also a recognised media spokesperson, having appeared on various platforms including BBC Newsnight, Victoria Derbyshire, Good Morning Britain, Sky News and BBC News. Hope is also a director for the Speakers Collective, a mental health speakers social enterprise. For 4 years, Hope managed to keep her eating disorder hidden, keeping dark secrets from friends and family. But then on the 17th of November 2007, her world changed forever. She was admitted to a mental health hospital as her skin was yellowing and her heart was failing. She was barely recognisable. Forced to leave her friends and family, the hospital became her home. Over the next year, at her lowest ebb, Hope faced the biggest challenge of her life. She had to find the courage to beat her anorexia. Hi Hope, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really lovely to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
I have to say that when I put together a list of people that I really wanted to speak to on the podcast and talk to about their experiences, you were one of those people that I had up there.
Oh,
so
awesome.
that's good. It doesn't make me feel too uneasy.
That's nice.
But I know your book you've written and you've just edited as well, or you've got a new version coming out.
Yeah, on the 28th of October.
Year. So that's Stand Tall Little Girl.
Yeah, that's right.
And you but you write in that a lot about your experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that you've been so open about what you've gone through. And I would really love to hear you talk about that a little bit. Also hear as well about other challenges that you faced, as well as going through your anorexia.
So I developed anorexia when I was about 12 years old.
Okay.
So throughout kind of my whole childhood, I'd really struggled with emotions, and I hate feeling emotion, really painful emotion I really struggle with. And when I was 12 years old, I got sexually abused and was going through quite a difficult patch at home with my family. And it was kind of a combination of all of this stuff going on that I realised that I hated what I was feeling so much. And instead of trying to talk about it, I began to kind of shut down a little bit and try and find my own coping mechanisms. And for me, that was completely food related. And I had this kind of voice in my head, which was the anorexia. And it was like this best friend. And it told me what I should do every day, how much food I should eat, who I should talk to, what exercise I should do. And every time I did what it told me to do, I just felt so much better about everything and about life. And I think for me, a big thing was that it helped me to shut off from all of that emotional stuff. So it meant I could sit in bed in the evenings, and if my parents were arguing or I'd have these distressing images in my head about what happened to me, I'd immediately be able to switch it off and start thinking about food and calories. And just taking me away from kind of everything about growing up, and taking me away, I guess, from all of those things that a lot of teens really struggle with, like family stuff, like sex, like body image, like all of your friendships and boyfriends or whatever it might be. And it just takes you out of all of those and puts you in kind of like this place that you feel is really, really safe. So I lived with that for about 4 years, managed to hide it from everyone around me. I think anorexia is a really secretive illness, and it is so easy to hide everything you're doing, hide the not eating, kind of everything. And I became very, very good at that. I also rebelled quite a bit throughout kind of that 4-year period, mainly so that I would just be out of the house, away from my mum, who was constantly like, could you eat something? Like, we're going to have dinner now. And kind of just tried to find that comfort elsewhere as well. And then when I was 16, my school eventually intervened. I went to my GP with my mum and then got referred to CAMS as an outpatient. And it was at that point that I went to CAMS that I realised that actually I was really, really unhappy. I didn't really like having that voice in my head at this point, but I didn't really know what to do about it. And throughout kind of the next 6 months, I really, really struggled with it. I struggled with accepting I had anything the matter with me. And then I struggled to actually start to talk about things. And interestingly, actually, which I can talk about a little bit more later if it's helpful. But over the last kind of 6 weeks, I've struggled a lot kind of mentally with things. And a big part of that is that all of that emotional stuff that came up with my eating disorder never really got tackled. So I'm still one of those people that really struggles with emotion, all of those painful things. And when I find stuff really triggering, I just automatically kind of switch off and will either leave the situation, get really defensive, or not want to eat. And I think for me, that was a massive thing with my illness, actually, something that I got so wrapped up in. But yeah, like I said, I went to CAMS as an outpatient, and then eventually after 6 months, I got admitted to a mental health hospital because I was so unwell and kind of had hit that complete and utter rock bottom, and there was nothing that anyone could do for me out in the community support. My mum couldn't cope with it anymore, and being one of 5, it was also really difficult for my brothers and sisters too. So I spent that next year in hospital learning about food, exercise, and learning to talk about how I felt. And I think for me, even when I left hospital, it was a challenge. I had to learn to cope with food and exercise and actually keep trying to talk about things and express myself in a healthy way.
And for someone at that age, obviously your school intervened. Is there something that someone can do to help someone at that stage, do you think? What do you think would have helped you if it hadn't been school? If you felt like you were really struggling to cope, but you knew that something wasn't wrong and you needed that help, but you're not in a position yourself to raise a hand and say, I need someone to help me with this?
I think probably friends, maybe. So I think my friends knew there was something the matter with me. There was a girl in the year above who also had anorexia, and she looked very unwell. And I think had my friends felt able to talk about it with me or be a bit more direct with it, it probably would have helped a little bit. I think the main thing that would have changed everything for me is actually had people started to try and talk to me about how I felt. So whether it was teachers at school, my family, my friends, whoever it was, and if someone tried to have that conversation, then I think it would have done the world of good for me. Because I think with eating disorders, the eating side of things is a secondary issue. It's the feelings and emotions that are the thing that needs to be tackled. But quite often people just look at the eating disorder and don't see the depth of everything. So people remind you to eat something, or they tell you to not exercise or whatever it might be. But actually, if they got to the bottom of it, then that person, you'd like to think the eating would just click into place.
Yeah. So instead of saying, can you make sure that you have this right now, they're probably better to sit down and say, how are you feeling today?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's really good advice to hear. And with not eating, that will have impacted you physically. During that time, were your periods, did they stop for a short period of time?
Yeah, no, so I didn't have any periods. And actually for me, that was a massive motivator in recovering, because I really want to have children one day. And so I was like, oh my God, I've got to get my periods back just so that I can have children. And I think actually with your periods, it's a really good indicator for actually where you are at with your weight and whether it's healthy, because we're all different size and shapes, and a healthy weight for me could be completely different than you or the next person. And I think for me, whenever my periods have stopped again, actually I've always been like, oh, I need to eat a little bit more and put on a little bit of weight. And I think actually for all of us, it's that indicator that we're not eating enough or whatever it might be.
And when did they return?
So when I was in hospital, actually, yeah, it was quite bizarre. So I must have been in hospital for probably 8 months, and they came back, and it was such a shock. And I think I was shocked because they'd come back, but I was also shocked because I wanted this so badly, but then when it happened, I thought that everyone would think that everything was okay and that I was totally fixed. And actually at that point, although my weight was getting to a more healthy weight, mentally I still had all of this work that needed to be done. And so I think actually for me, when my periods did come back, I hit this plateau in my recovery, because I was like, I don't want everyone to think that I'm okay now and that everything's just gone away. And I had to actually start talking about things much more, and being really honest about things, because I think that's the thing with eating disorders too, is people look on from the outside and they think that because you're physically healthy and you're eating, that something is just fixed within you. But actually it goes so much deeper than that. And just because you might have friends who are eating healthily, or I don't know, they're a healthy weight, actually they could mentally still be in a really bad place.
Yeah. And what are you working on now and since your recovery to help with your emotions and your feelings?
So I think the emotional stuff I've only just started working on probably in the last 6 weeks. So I had this kind of false sense of security, I think, in my head, actually, where I thought that everything was fixed, and that everything was okay and that it was going to be fine. And then 6 weeks ago, I went through a lot of change, a lot of turmoil. My relationship started to break down. And you know when you're kind of just feel like your life is a bit all over the shop. And my problem is that I do a lot of work in this space, and people kind of look on at me and think I'm recovered and I'm a campaigner and I do all of this stuff. So it was a massive thing for me to actually be like, I'm actually really not okay with all of this and how I'm feeling. So now I have therapy every week. So I have 3 sessions a week, which after the summer, it won't be 3 sessions a week. It'll be like one, probably once a week or one every 2 weeks. And the therapy that I have is person-centered. So it's not looking at the food stuff at all, but it's just dealing with emotions and revisiting all of the stuff that happened when I was younger and trying to understand more about the things that trigger me and what doesn't trigger me. The other more practical things that I do is, so I use exercise in a really healthy way now. So when I was unwell, exercise was this like massive obsession of mine, and I did it all the time. And if I didn't do enough of it, I'd feel really guilty. And I pretty much hated doing it, but it was something that I just felt I had to do. And since kind of coming through my recovery, I now use it as a way to give me that headspace, but also to try and help me feel a bit more body confident. So to realise that, like, I'd much rather be a strong person and do weightlifting in the gym or whatever than be someone who's really underweight, prone to injury, and can run miles and miles and miles. And I also challenge myself every day. So with food, clothing, mainly food and clothing actually. And that's like I go out for a last minute meal with friends, or last week I wore leather trousers, which sounds ridiculous when I say it. I'm like,
in this heat?
Yeah, it was ridiculous as well. I went and spoke in the hospital, and literally walked into the room and was just like sweating. And then I wanted to open the door, but then because there was all these unwell people, I was like, I can't open the door. I thought, this is awful. But yeah, so things like that, which actually I think is a massive thing for me. And I do think actually, whether we have been unwell or whether we struggle with our mental health or whatever it might be, actually we all need to challenge ourselves to push those boundaries a little bit more, because actually the more we do it, we realise that it's okay to fail and it's okay to feel really rubbish some days, but actually if we keep pushing ourselves, then it helps us get to that better headspace generally. And then I think the biggest one is making sure I've got that support network around me. So having people that I talk to about how I'm feeling, and knowing kind of where I can go to for different bits of support. So whether it's like, I want a night where I don't talk about mental health stuff at all, I have a certain group of friends that I go and see, or like talking to my mum about how I actually feel, and working out actually who I can talk to and who I can have those honest discussions with.
I think talking is such a key part, isn't it? Because if you keep everything restrained and you don't share, then you're not able to process the thoughts that you've got going on or how you're feeling that day. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because you can have one day and you feel brilliant, and then the next day something happens and you just think, oh well, this is really pants.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think a lot of us really struggle to talk about things. So I do a huge amount of work in schools, and quite often it always comes up with the fact that only 1 or 2 of the people in the like a room of 30 students will actually talk to their friends about how they feel. And it's things like that that are just so shocking. And I was like that. I used to hide everything and not talk about anything with my friends. Or you talk about kind of that stuff that everyone talks about, like makeup and boys and sex, but we don't actually talk about how we feel and that kind of nitty-gritty stuff. And so I do think it is about finding people around you that you can be really honest with, and actually knowing that, like, if I went into school when I was younger and had I told someone that I was really struggling with something, I guarantee it would have had this knock-on effect, and actually other people would have been struggling with similar things, or they would have known someone who had been. And I think, again, it's about trying to empower other people to talk about things through beginning to start talking more honestly and openly.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me a little bit about your campaign as well, Dump the Scales.
So I launched Dump the Scales last year now, and the reason I launched it was because in 2016 I relapsed and I tried to access support. I basically knew what was happening in my head. It was a bit of a weird situation. I was kind of struggling for about 4 months, and I knew that at any point I could just flip over the edge and get really, like, lose loads of weight, end up back in hospital. And when I left Children's Services, I said I never wanted to end up back in an adult eating disorder unit. And so I tried to access support through my local mental health trust. But despite ticking every single box, the one box I didn't tick was the weight box, and I wasn't actually underweight, so wasn't able to access any kind of support, any kind of services. And after I kind of came through my recovery with, I went on antidepressants for 1.5 years, and I went back to kind of like the real basics of recovery, so meal planning, exercising, everything like that. And I realised that actually this isn't something that just happened to me, but it's something that happens to like hundreds of people all the time across the NHS. And it really frustrated me, because I think quite often when we think of someone with anorexia or with an eating disorder, we always think of anorexia, and we always think of someone who's stick thin, who looks like a skeleton, and normally like a teenage girl. And it was this whole kind of misunderstanding around actually what an eating disorder is. And my problem with the system is that we do wait until people hit that crisis point. And I think with eating disorders, it is a lack of understanding. So I launched the campaign to try and change this. So kind of, I guess publicly, I wanted to raise awareness around eating disorders and to help people who hadn't been through it or who knew people that had been, to help them understand that actually it's not a weight thing, but it's so much more than that. And then working with the government to actually try and enforce some kind of guidelines and some kind of change within this. So it's been a bit of a funny year with it. It's been very frustrating at times, but also really exciting at times. So after it launched, we had a debate in Parliament about the campaign and about eating disorder diagnosis. And kind of since then, it kind of gathered a lot of momentum. We ended up taking it to Downing Street and getting a response from the Prime Minister, which was slightly frustrating, the response. It was one of those kind of stock responses. We've got funding, it will come into play in kind of 5-10 years' time. And then I've been to various kind of meetings with ministers and kind of MPs discussing actually what we're going to do about it. And my biggest frustration at the moment is we made such massive progress with Jackie Doyle-Price, who was the Minister for Mental Health, but now we've got a new Minister for Mental Health with the new Prime Minister. There's been this complete shape-up, and I don't know how likely it is for eating disorders to stay on the agenda when it comes to what they're trying to work on, what they're trying to engage with. So yeah, I'm trying at the moment to push the campaign again and getting people to write to Nadine Dorries, who's the new Minister for Mental Health, and also people to write to Boris Johnson if they want to actually try and make them understand that this is a really serious issue. So yeah, it's been a work in progress. I think the hardest thing for me is that I've had a lot of people contact me who are currently in that position where their children are really, really underweight and there isn't any support for them. And I had a woman just before I came here actually, who lives in the northwest of England, and her daughter's BMI is ridiculously low. She's been in a general hospital for the last week and a half, but there's nowhere for her to go to for support because there's only 4 beds and they don't see her as a severe case. And it's just this frustration that actually what does it take with an eating disorder to get to that point where you're so severe you can access support. So yeah, that's a massive piece of work I'm working on. I think like with all mental health, it's a really big issue that actually we do seem to wait until people hit that crisis point. And I think as individuals, we need to start taking responsibility to get these issues tackled, but also to help prevent them escalating.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone wants to help support you with that, where can they go to?
So the campaign's called Dump the Scales. So if you Google Dump the Scales and my name, then the campaign should come up. And if you're particularly interested in certain aspects of the campaign or wanting to get more involved with it, do feel free to kind of contact me on social media, so on Twitter or Instagram, and I can talk to you a little bit more about the kind of stuff that you can do to actually lobby your own MP locally.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. That's great. And I like to ask a couple of light-hearted questions. So, what was your favourite film as a teenager?
Oh wow, what a question. My favourite film, probably Clueless, which is probably really dated now, isn't it?
No, that's a classic.
But I did love it, and one of the reasons I really liked it is because this is so lame, I always wanted to have one of those wardrobes where you could, have you seen it?
Yes.
Where you could type in what kind of outfit you wanted, and then it would tell you if it clashed or if it didn't clash. And I always thought that was brilliant, because I find it so difficult to get stuff that matches. So I thought that would be awesome.
I'm surprised no one has come up with that idea for a wardrobe.
Yeah, I feel like I should. Yeah, maybe that would be my new thing to make some money.
And what about song?
My favourite song. So when I was growing up, I mainly listened to S Club 7, which again I feel really embarrassed to say that now, but actually I do still sometimes listen to S Club 7. But in my bedroom, I had S Club 7 posters literally everywhere, and on a Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock, I think it was, they used to have an S Club 7 TV series, which was probably really rubbish looking back, but at the time I used to really like it. So most S Club 7 songs I really liked. Probably my favourite one for singing in a heartfelt way was Never Had a Dream Come True, which I'm not going to sing now, but yeah, Google it if you haven't heard it.
And teen crush?
Oh, that's another good question. I don't know if I had one.
Leonardo DiCaprio's been very popular.
Has he?
Mm-hmm.
I must have had one. Leonardo DiCaprio's all right, I guess. I was trying to think what I really, Gary Barlow, but he's probably more someone that I have a bit of a crush on kind of now.
And I ask all of my guests what advice you would give to your younger self. So I know in your book you've written letters to, I think it was it your 15 or 16-year-old self? What would you say to that person now?
Probably two things. Firstly, talk.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about what you've been through and know that that's okay to talk about things. And I think for me that's a massive one, particularly in regards to all the sexual abuse stuff, actually, because I think I hid that for so long and really struggled with it. And actually the long-term impact of things like that on someone's life and on my life have been ridiculous. And had I talked about it at the time, and if I were able to talk about it, I could be in a completely different headspace with it now. And then the other thing is to just kind of keep doing what you want to do. And I think, again, that's a really important one for me, and something that actually I do try and live by now. Actually, it's really scary to kind of put yourself out there and to be a little bit different and to speak up and speak out about things. But actually, if we keep doing that, we build our confidence, but actually also we have something that we can believe in, and that pushes us forward every single day and kind of keeps us moving forward and keeps us in a really good headspace too.
And with the sexual abuse, we didn't really touch on it too much at the beginning. If someone's just gone through that and they feel lost, or it's something that they've experienced in the past, are there good places that they can go to start talking about it?
So I talked about mine a little bit when I was in hospital, and then last September I reported it to the police. And when I was doing that, I worked with victim support, mainly because I wanted to understand kind of the whole process behind it, and understand, I guess, what the next steps were with it. And I think also when you're in that situation, you also don't realise how much it's going to take it out of you, having to relive stuff that you've potentially boxed up for a very long time. So I'd probably look at victim support. Also in London, they have a survivors network. They've probably got them elsewhere in the country as well, but it's a really good place to go to for kind of group support. And I think, again, particularly with that one, it's quite often when you've been through sexual abuse or rape, it is very, very difficult to get a conviction, particularly if it happens years ago. And for a lot of people, and I'm sure some of you guys might have been through this, is you go to the police, you do all the evidence, and then your case gets rejected because there isn't enough evidence and it's your word against theirs. And actually going to survivors groups for me was really important, because it meant that everyone else understood where you were coming from when you felt like no one believed you, and having to deal with all of that emotional turmoil as well. So I'd probably suggest those as my big ones. And also, this is a more mental health related one, but on Twitter there's also various hashtags, so the join in hashtag, which people do write a little bit of stuff about sexual abuse and that, but also the mental health stuff, and actually looking at those online support networks, so that if you don't feel able to go and talk to someone face to face, actually it's quite a good way to start off having that conversation, and also realising that you're not totally alone in how you're feeling.
Yeah, that's great. I think amongst the negativity that social media gets, it's brilliant with those sorts of initiatives that help bring people together or communities together.
No, definitely. And I do think, I'm probably going to go on a massive tangent now, but I do think as individuals it's about us finding those positives in social media, so making sure we're taking a bit of responsibility for the accounts we're following. And sometimes when I'm working in schools and stuff, actually we get the young people to actually think about some accounts they follow and actually how that makes them feel. And I always think that actually we should be trying to do that a little bit more, whether it's as adults or as young people or teens, actually thinking about whether we've got various things on our Instagram we follow, whether that makes us feel happy or sad, and if it makes us feel sad, just don't follow it, like try and block it or whatever it might be.
And what work do you do in schools when you go in? Is it talking and spending time listening to pupils?
So mixture really. So mainly kind of workshops on mental health and getting people to understand about well-being and what they can do to manage their well-being. And a big one on that is actually just getting people to know that it's okay to talk about things. I think quite often, and I have found this in schools, depending on where I am in the country, is there is still this massive stigma around mental health. And it's quite funny actually, because I don't think I look like the classic person that people expect to turn up when they're going to hear a talk on mental health. And so when I turn up, like most people are quite shocked and they're like, oh gosh, she's had a mental health problem. But actually I think that's really important, because actually it makes us kind of normalise those conversations much more and helps young people know they're not alone in how they're feeling. So I tend to do, so workshops and then normally some one-to-one stuff, but normally the one-to-one stuff is kind of organic when you're in the school, because you will have said something that's triggered something with someone, and then that conversation kind of starts happening off the back of that.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it's fun.
Good. And I also ask everyone, if you could give a gift to teenage girls all over the world, anything, what would that be?
Nike trainers. Mainly because I don't actually have my Nikes on today. Normally I only wear Nike trainers, and I've got pretty much every single colour probably, which is ridiculous. I get them in this really cheap outlet, so I don't feel quite as bad that I've got loads of pairs. And I also think that everyone should have a pair of trainers to wear with every single outfit. And also I'm a massive runner, so then you can double them up for running as well as looking cool.
2 for 1.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's been so good speaking to you today, Hope.
It's been fun, thank you.
If you've been affected by any topics in today's episode, please contact Samaritans. You can go to their website www.samaritans.org or call them on 116 123. Thanks for listening to Becoming Women with me, Ella Sims. If you like the show and want to know more, head to becomingwomen.com or follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I'd love it if you could rate and review this podcast or get in touch, as your comments on each episode mean so much to me.